The keeper never rushes. Every forgotten story deserves to be handled with care. In the deepest chamber of the Midnight Archives vault, silence hangs over endless rows of ancient wooden drawers. Each one holds a story that history tried to bury, but never truly erased. A worn iron key slides into an old brass lock. It turns with a heavy click. Somewhere in the darkness, a raven watches without a sound. Dust drifts through the warm glow of lantern light as a single archive drawer slowly opens. Inside rests a weathered case file wrapped in faded twine. A cracked wax seal still bears the mark of the keeper. The seal is carefully broken. The brittle pages unfold. Ink faded by time still tells a story written in blood. Tonight, the keeper opens another forgotten file. March 4th, 1880. The countryside near Lucan, Ontario lies silent beneath the final hours of darkness. Snow covers the fields. A cold wind moves through the bare trees. Most families are still asleep, but not everyone. Hidden in the darkness, a group of masked men moves quietly toward a lonely farmhouse. They carry clubs, they carry axes, some carry guns. They have come with only one purpose: to ensure that no member of the Donnelly family survives the night. Moments later, the silence is shattered. Windows explode inward. Doors are forced open. Shouts echo through the farmhouse. Then come the screams. By sunrise, 5 people are dead. An entire family has been nearly wiped from existence. Yet despite dozens of suspects, countless witnesses, and years of investigation, no one would ever be held responsible. But this was never a story about a single night. It was the ending of a feud that had been growing for decades. Tonight, we open the file of the Black Donnellys to understand why the Donnelly name became one of the most feared in Canadian history. We must travel back more than 30 years, long before the violence, long before the fires, long before the murders. The story begins across the Atlantic Ocean in Ireland. During the early 19th century, much of rural Ireland was marked by poverty, hardship, and uncertainty. Families struggled to survive under difficult conditions, and opportunities were few. Like thousands of others searching for a better future, James and Johanna Donnelly made the difficult decision to leave their homeland behind. In the 1840s, they crossed the Atlantic and settled in what was then Upper Canada, eventually making their home near the growing community of Lucan, in what is now Ontario. The land they chose was beautiful. Dense forests stretched for miles. Rivers cut through the wilderness. But beauty came with a price. Every acre had to be cleared by hand. Trees were felled one by one. Fields were carved from the forest through years of exhausting labor. Life on the frontier demanded determination. Success often depended on strength, resilience, and the willingness to fight for every opportunity. The Donnellys worked tirelessly to build a farm and provide for their growing family. Over time, they became well known throughout the area. But they also developed a reputation that divided opinion. To some neighbors, they were hard-working pioneers trying to make a living in a harsh land. To others, they were stubborn, hot-tempered, quick to settle disputes with their fists. Rumors spread easily in small communities. Every disagreement became another story. Every argument became another accusation. Before long, the Donnelly name carried as much suspicion as respect. Whether every tale was true remains a matter of debate. Some stories were supported by court records. Others grew larger with each retelling. But one thing is certain: tension was building, and the quiet farming community surrounding Lucan was slowly becoming a place where neighbors no longer trusted one another. No one could have imagined that these simmering resentments would one day erupt into one of the most shocking acts of vigilante violence in Canadian history. As the years passed, the Donnelly family grew larger, stronger, and more deeply rooted in Biddulph Township. But so did the resentment that surrounded them. In those early days of settlement, property lines were often uncertain. Land claims overlapped, boundaries were disputed, and arguments between neighbours were common. One disagreement would change the Donnelly family's future forever. In 1857, James Donnelly became involved in a bitter dispute with a neighbour named Patrick Farrell over a section of land and the construction of a roadway. What began as another heated argument quickly turned violent. During the confrontation, James struck Farrell. Farrell later died from his injuries. James Donnelly was arrested and charged with murder. At trial, he was convicted, not of murder, but of manslaughter, and sentenced to several years in prison. While James served his sentence, Johanna was left to care for the family and keep the farm running. She proved to be fiercely determined. Against enormous odds, she held the family together until James returned home. But prison had not ended the conflict. If anything, it had made the divide even deeper. Over the years, members of the Donnelly family were accused of fighting, intimidation, theft, and acts of revenge against rival families. Horses disappeared. Barns mysteriously caught fire. Fences were destroyed. Wagons were damaged in the night. Some accusations led to arrests. Many did not. It became increasingly difficult to separate fact from rumour. Every crime in the area seemed to bring the same whispered accusation. It must have been the Donnellys. Whether guilty or innocent, the family became the community's most convenient target. Fear spread alongside anger. Neighbours stopped trusting neighbours. Old grudges were passed from one generation to the next. By the late 1870s, many people believed the legal system had failed to restore peace. Some began to believe that justice would have to come from somewhere else. In secret meetings, behind closed doors and away from curious eyes, plans were beginning to take shape. Plans that would soon lead to one of the darkest nights in Canadian history. By the winter of 1880, fear and resentment had reached a breaking point. For years, neighbours had argued, families had chosen sides, and every new crime seemed to deepen the divide. Whether the Donnellys were responsible for every accusation no longer seemed to matter. In the minds of many, they had become the symbol of everything that was wrong in the township. Frustrated with what they believed was a justice system that had failed them, a number of local men began meeting in secret. They called themselves the Vigilance Committee. Officially, their purpose was to restore law and order. Unofficially, many believed they had already decided how that would be accomplished. Meetings were held quietly. Plans were discussed behind closed doors. Oaths of secrecy were reportedly taken. Few written records remain, leaving historians to piece together what happened through witness testimony and later accounts. But one fact is difficult to dispute. The Donnelly family had become the committee's primary target. As winter tightened its grip on the countryside, whispers spread through nearby communities. Something was coming. Some claimed they had heard threats. Others later insisted they knew an attack was being planned. Yet no one warned the Donnellys. Or, if they did, it was already too late. Inside the Donnelly farmhouse, life continued much as it always had. Chores were finished, meals were shared. The family settled in for another cold March night, unaware that a group of armed men was preparing to descend upon their home before sunrise. The snow-covered roads concealed every footprint. The darkness hid every face, and somewhere beyond the fields, Lanterns began moving silently through the night. The men carried clubs, axes, guns. Some had blackened their faces to avoid recognition. Others simply trusted that no one would ever speak their names. They believed that before the sun rose, the Donnelly family would be no more. What happened next would shock the entire country and leave behind questions that remain unanswered to this day. March 4th, 1880. It was just before dawn. The countryside remained silent beneath a blanket of snow. As most of the township slept, a group of armed men approached the Donnelly farmhouse. Their footsteps were muffled by the fresh snow. Their lanterns cast faint light across the frozen fields. There would be no warning, no chance to escape. The men surrounded the farmhouse before forcing their way inside. Within moments, the quiet morning erupted into chaos. Members of the Donnelly family were attacked before they could fully understand what was happening. The violence was swift and overwhelming. When it was over, James Donnelly, his wife Johanna, their son Tom, their niece Bridget, and another resident of the home lay dead. The attackers then set the farmhouse on fire. Flames quickly consumed the wooden building, destroying much of the physical evidence that investigators would later search for. But the attack was not over. Believing another member of the family had escaped, several of the attackers rode to the nearby home of William Donnelly. They intended to finish what they had started. This time, however, their plan failed. William was not home. Inside the house, those who remained managed to survive by hiding from the attackers until they finally left. As daylight spread across the countryside, smoke rose above the ruins of the Donnelly farm. News of the killings traveled quickly. Even in a community long accustomed to bitter feuds, the scale of the violence left people stunned. Entire families gathered in silence. Neighbors whispered about what had happened. Some expressed horror. Others remained strangely quiet. Rumors spread almost immediately. Everyone seemed to know who had taken part. Yet almost no one was willing to speak openly, whether out of fear, loyalty, or a belief that justice had finally been served. The truth became buried beneath silence. The Donnelly family had been nearly erased, but the mystery surrounding their deaths was only beginning. By sunrise, investigators arrived to find little more than the smoking remains of the Donnelly farmhouse. The fire had destroyed much of the evidence that might have revealed exactly what had happened inside. But one thing was immediately clear. This had not been the work of a single person. It had been an organized attack. Suspicion quickly fell upon members of the local vigilance committee. Their names were whispered throughout Biddulph Township. Many residents claimed they knew who had taken part in the killings, yet when questioned by police, memories suddenly became uncertain. Witnesses changed their stories. Others refused to testify at all. Fear had settled over the community. Authorities eventually charged several men in connection with the murders. One of the most closely watched trials focused on Michael Gillies, who was accused of taking part in the attack. The courtroom was filled with tension. Prosecutors believed they had enough testimony to secure a conviction, but the case began to unravel. Key witnesses contradicted themselves. Some admitted they had been pressured. Others claimed they could no longer identify the attackers with certainty. Without reliable testimony, reasonable doubt grew stronger. In the end, the jury returned a verdict of not guilty. Other prosecutions met the same fate. No one was ever convicted for the murders committed that March morning. For many, the outcome only deepened the mystery. Did fear keep witnesses silent? Did loyalty to neighbors outweigh loyalty to the law? Or had the truth become impossible to separate from rumor after decades of bitter conflict? Historians continue to debate those questions. What is beyond dispute is that 5 lives were lost. And justice, at least in the eyes of many, was never fully served. As the years passed, the burned farmhouse disappeared. The people involved grew old. Some carried their secrets to the grave. But the story of the Black Donnellys refused to fade. Instead, it became something larger than history. It became legend. Nearly a century and a half has passed since the events of that cold March morning. The Donnelly farmhouse is gone. The men accused of carrying out the attack are long gone. But the story refuses to disappear. Today, the Black Donnellys remain one of Canada's most enduring historical mysteries. Books have been written, documentaries have been filmed. Historians continue to examine court records, newspaper accounts, and eyewitness testimony, hoping to better understand what truly happened. Yet many questions remain unanswered. Were the Donnellys dangerous outlaws? Or were they a family whose reputation grew larger than the truth? Was the attack an act of justice, or a calculated act of murder carried out under the cover of darkness? History offers clues, but not certainty. Around Lucan and the surrounding countryside, local legends still endure. Some visitors claim the old Donnelly homestead carries an uneasy silence. Others speak of strange sounds, unexplained shadows, or the feeling that they are not alone. Whether these stories are rooted in fact, folklore, or imagination is impossible to say. But perhaps that is why the Black Donnellys continue to fascinate us. Some mysteries aren't remembered because we know the answers. They're remembered because we never found them. The keeper slowly closes the weathered file. The final page settles into place. A faded black ribbon is carefully wrapped around the brittle papers. The cracked wax seal is replaced. Somewhere in the shadows, the raven lets out a single quiet call. The archive drawer slides shut. The heavy lock clicks once more. Another forgotten story returns to the vault, waiting for the day someone chooses to open it again. Thank you for joining me inside the Midnight Archives vault. If you enjoy exploring the darker corners of history, the unexplained and the mysteries that time could never solve, consider subscribing and becoming part of our growing community. Until next time. The vault remains locked, but not forgotten.